So thanks to Jack Black and Saturday Night Live, we have a introduction to today's topic, which, if you haven't already guessed, is going to be on humility. We've been in this series called ETHOS, each week looking at a different value, a value that has the power to really transform our lives, help us find our way back to connection in this world, and perhaps even brings us to create the kind of society, the kind of community, the kind of world that we want to live in. And so last week, we talked about the value of forgiveness. And something that both forgiveness and humility have in common, perhaps even beyond some of the other values that we've explored over these last 15 weeks now, is that both forgiveness and humility might hit your ears as a little bit of churchy words. And what I mean by that is that a lot of us grew up perhaps in a religious upbringing where we heard about certain values and we felt this sense of obligation that these values are what we need and we should and we ought to have these values in order to make us a good person. And I want to hopefully pull us out of this sense of obligation, out of this sense of should or ought, and really just see each value as an invitation into a fuller life, into just an opportunity for deeper connection with each other, with ourselves, with the planet, right? So you're not going to be graded on any of this. No one's going to be following you around, making sure that you stay humble this week. It's for you to take and apply as you would like to. But what I find to be sacred about humility is that I find that I look out in this world today and I think humility perhaps can be an antidote to so many of the things that we face in our society today, some of the greater problems and the divide that we're currently experiencing. That it seems that there has been this shift towards deeper arrogance and apathy and superiority in our communication with one another. And this leads to, and is perhaps even caused by, a sense of disconnection from one another, right? Disconnection from our humanity, disconnection from this planet that we are so blessed to be a part of. But before we really get into humility, I want to be clear about what I find humility to be and what I find it not to be, right? Because we don't want to get stuck in these older ideas of humility. And this is just for me. I look at humility, and what I don't think humility is, at least in the context that we're talking about today, I don't see humility as low self-esteem, right? Because many of us, we were given this sense that humility is self-deprecating and reducing ourselves, right? But in fact, so much of what I hope that we experience here in these walls is a sense of building each other up, reminding each other how cosmically valuable one another is, right? So humility is not about deprecating ourselves below that. But in fact, a lot of us probably grew up with some sort of framing of humility that what we need to do is to make ourselves into nothing, right? Especially with our religious upbringing. And I'll just see if any of this rings a bell, right? You probably remember this song. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch, right? Okay, whoa, out of the blue. Where did that come from, right? Right? First two lines, and already, right, we have this framing of ourselves as wrong and as bad. And this sticks with us, right, throughout our entire lives. Imagine if love songs out just in popular culture, imagine if love songs had this amount of self-deprecation in them, we would think something's wrong, right? Like, you are so beautiful to me, and I'm so horribly ugly, yeah, hoo-hoo, right? It's like that would be weird. But we do this. This is what we think humility is. So I would first say I don't think that's what it is. And second, I definitely don't think humility is something that we are responsible to make sure other people are doing, right? It's not your job to humble other people. And in fact, all throughout this series, what we've been finding is that really these values are between us and us, right? It needs to start within, right? And we can't hold ourselves to police whether other people are living from these values or not. Lastly, humility, and this might seem obvious to you because it's a little bit of an oxymoron, but humility is not something to brag about, as we might have seen from this video, right? Like perhaps you're on a date or you're on a job interview, which are kind of the same thing, right? And someone asks you, like, what are your favorite qualities about yourself, right? You can't say, oh, I'm so humble, right? It doesn't work. It just doesn't even make sense. See, this is what we might even call a humble brag. You may have heard this term where, you might say something that sounds like humility, but it's actually secretly bragging about yourself, right? So I'll give you an example of a humble brag, just so you know what to watch out for in society. If someone were to ask me, like, hey, Jake, it's so good to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time. What have you been up to? And I say, oh, I've just been so busy, so tired because I'm just so busy volunteering, all the volunteer work I'm doing. Oh, and, I'm just doing so well at my job. I'm so successful. Yeah, it just makes me so busy, right? And taking all this time. And I have all these friends that I'm trying, I have this amazing circle of friends. And so, yeah, I'm just so tired and so exhausted, And it's just, okay, that didn't work. That was a bomb. That'll factor in later, right? I'm going to talk about bombing later. But the reality is we don't want to humble brag. Okay, if that didn't work, I'll give you an example of like a celebrity humble brag, just so you understand what I'm talking about, because clearly my own version didn't work. Kylie Jenner says her sisters tease her for being a billionaire. Can we hold a moment of silence for the teasing that's occurring there? Okay, all right. Here's what humility is not. Humility is not proving anything to anyone. It's here to help us, right? It's here to give us an opportunity to connect further with each other, to be more rooted in ourselves, and in fact, perhaps even to be, as Greg so beautifully brought us into this cosmic awareness, to be centered in this larger cosmic context that we find ourselves in. And so I want to break down what this word humility actually means, going back to its Latin roots. It comes from a Latin word, humilis, which means low. And you might be thinking, well, after everything you just said, Jake, how could you tell us that to be humble means to be low, right? You might be thinking this is a bad thing. And sure, when our cosmology, when our framework tends to be that up is good and down is bad, then yeah, I can understand how you might think that low is bad, right? But what if in this context, based on the root of this word, what if low was actually a good thing? What could that possibly mean? Well, the word humilis is actually derived from the Latin word humus, which means earth, soil, or ground. The root word of humility is not low as in belittling oneself. It is low as though we are low to the ground, right? Close to the earth, connected to the soil. And so if nothing else, if you walk away here today, and if nothing else, I hope that you remember that this is where we get the word humble from. Humus, earth, soil, ground, right? It's not hummus. It's very close. It is not hummus. But perhaps every time you see hummus in your refrigerator or at the grocery store, may you be reminded of humus, right? Humus is not about lessening ourselves. It's about grounding ourselves. And how easy is it to become ungrounded in today's world? With the chaos that we experience, with the technology that seems to overload our minds. And so we often think about humility and we contrast it with ego, right? But a big ego is just one of the ways that we lose our grounding. We also become ungrounded when we get caught up in this thinking that me and my people, we're right and everyone else is wrong. We lose our grounding when we look at our problems and we give our problems more weight than perhaps they deserve, right? We lose a sense of what's important and what is not. And ultimately, we lose our grounding when we see ourselves as separate from the earth. And we live in a society today that, in that context, especially with our technology, with our industry, it's so easy to lose that realization that we are the earth. We are of the earth. And our society has become so ungrounded from this planet that supports and sustains us. And so the regrounding that I think we can experience around humility is not, again, it's not a should. It's not, oh, you need to do this in order to be an acceptable person. I just think that it enables us to further live this life of values that we're after. It enables us to be more present when we're not distracted by things that don't matter. It enables us to forgive when we see how important love and connection is, right, in this vast cosmos. It frees us from the illusions that we so often hold about ourselves. And I believe that in many ways, the spiritual path is one of removing what is illusory and finding our way to the truth. And so how do we do this? How do we experience this kind of humility? Well, perhaps one way is to take the things that are already coming our way and repurpose them for our own benefit. Richard Rohr explains this well. He's a Franciscan mystic, and I love his thoughts on humility. He says, I have prayed for years for one good humiliation a day, and then I must watch my reaction to it. I have no other way of spotting both my denied shadow self and my idealized persona. This might be hard for some of us to imagine asking for a good humiliation a day. But it's important to remember that humiliation shares that same root of humility and humilis and humus. And what Richard Rohr is doing is he's inviting us to see humility and to see the humiliations and the humblings that are already guaranteed to us, but to see them as a technology and a tool for clarity and deeper truth in our lives. That when you are humbled, and most certainly we all will be, it's an opportunity to encounter truth. Now, if you've hung around all day at any, amount of time, what you've probably noticed is that just like I did 5 minutes ago, I stand on stage and try to make a joke, and I'm met with crickets, right? In fact, crickets would be preferable because there would be some form of sound. I just hear the ringing in my own ears with that amount of silence, right? In the comedy world, we would call this a bum, right? You bum, okay? And the thing is for me, what I've actually found is that, this is, for a public speaker, it's one of the things that most don't want to happen, right? But what I've found is that every time I experience that humiliation and I survive, right? I'm like, oh, okay, I'm alive, I'm still here, okay. It actually can build confidence and reduce fear because we see what we're capable of living through and finding a truer picture of ourselves. And so perhaps for you, right, in your career, maybe just in your life path, you may look back and you might find that the moments that humbled you the most, they actually planted the seeds for a courage, right, and a confidence and a grounding in yourself that came later. Our humiliations, if we see them not as something to avoid, but as a gift, they have the opportunity to ground and center us just as much as our achievements, right? They ground us by reminding us what not to take too seriously. They help us discern what's important and what's not. And they show so much about who we are, In many ways, you're applying for a job and they look for a resume, and I think so often they're asking for your achievements, but I think it'd be more effective if a resume asked for a list of failures and humiliations, because they tell what you have lived through and what you have integrated, right? So perhaps, it would be a good job interview question, right? Have you ever farted loudly in front of a room full of people? How did you get through that, right? Have you ever been at the airport going through security and the TSA agent says, have a wonderful flight, and you say, you too? Right? How did you survive that shame? See, our humiliations, they're coming, right? And we can either fear and resist them, or we can watch our reaction, seeing them as a gift, an opportunity, a tool, a practice. and a reminder. What do they remind us of? They remind us that the world doesn't revolve around us. That a lot of the little things that we get so hyper fixated on, they actually don't matter. That some of what you're going through and some of what we as a society are going through is part of a much larger cosmic context that can be so powerful to remind ourselves of. And so for this, to find our place in that larger space in the universe, I have a couple humiliation hacks, if you will, that I personally rely upon, both of which come from legendary science communicator Carl Sagan. If you recall, Carl Sagan, whose work, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, he was such a beautiful and very even spiritual communicator of science. He had his famous series Cosmos in the 80s. And he gives a couple of frames that for me have helped me find myself in the greater space in which we exist and our sense of time, right? Like how we show up in the larger timeline of things. And so the first thing that he offers as a gift, he provides this beautiful commentary on a well-known picture. This is a picture known as the pale blue dot. It was taken by Voyager, which we sent out into space. And so Voyager, gliding through the cosmos, takes this look back, turns around, and takes a picture of our planet. You might be wondering, where is it? I don't see it. Well, to zoom in, you see that little tiny dot in the center of the screen. This is Earth. And so in 94, Carl Sagan writes this book, The Pale Blue Dot, and he comments on how this type of perspective can give us such a powerful look at our place in the cosmos. He has a famous speech where he goes through and he basically says that this speck of dust suspended in a sunbeam, all that we have ever known has taken place right here. All the wars, all the empires, all of recorded history right there in that mote of dust suspended on a sunbeam. If you have not heard this speech, it's easily accessible on YouTube, right? Go home today and type in Carl Sagan pale blue dot. If you're watching online, you can just stop right now, go there, and then come back. But I want to just share one of the little passages from this speech that he gives. He says, "It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known." So it's things like this that help us rediscover and reground ourselves in space, right? But I also find it even more humbling to think about time, right? Because one thing about our universe is that it's been around for a long, long time. And Carl Sagan, another thing he did is he popularized the idea of the cosmic calendar. The cosmic calendar is a thought experiment where if you were to take the 14 or so billion years that this universe has been around and you were to compress them into one calendar year, right, where the beginning of the universe is 12:01 a.m. on January 1st, and it gives us this sense of where we are on the timeline of our universe. So if all of the lifespan of the universe was compressed into one calendar year, our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, only shows up on May 2nd. The solar system that we live in only shows up September 2nd. Earth, September 6th. Single-celled organisms don't show up until November 9th. Multicellular organisms, December 5th. Animals don't show up until December 17th. Plants, December 20th. The dinosaurs show up on Christmas Eve, and they go extinct December 30th. Homo sapiens, our ancestors, show up 11:52 p.m. on New Year's Eve. All of recorded history happened in the last 11 seconds. Jesus would have walked the earth around 4 seconds ago, and our lives take place within around 1/6 to 1/5 of 1 second. This perspective, this scale for looking at the universe can be frightening, but it can also be freeing. Perhaps it frees us from the fear of failure. Perhaps it frees us from the fear that we have to figure everything out. Spoiler alert, you're not going to, and that's okay. And sure, the vastness of it all can be overwhelming. It can be disorienting. So Carl Sagan gives us this beautiful reminder. He says, for small creatures such as we, the vastness is bearable only through love. You matter so much to those who love you, right? The connections of love that we share. This is what it's all about. And so perhaps everything else is a blip, right? Take the things that are bogging you down, right? That aren't worth your time and energy. I don't know what you're going through. Perhaps difficulties at work, right? The naysayers on social media. I don't know. It's all a dust. It's all a blip. But how much you matter to the people that you love, right? To the experience of love that we share, that is something to always be prioritized. And I think through these thought experiments, I think what Carl Sagan is reminding us of is that ultimately, in the vastness of time, in the vastness of space, we are not separate from the earth. We are the earth. Our modern lives give us this illusion, right, with our technology, our cars, our fancy whatever, we get this sense that we are separate. But when we have the courage to humiliate ourselves into the earth, into the ground, into the soil, we realize that in the grand scheme of things, we are the earth. And the borders that we fight over, right, seem so ridiculous from that context. Right? When you see that picture of the pale blue dot, and then you remember that one time that you went over to the neighbor and you're like, this is my property line. You plant your rose bushes over there, right? It just shows you the folly. There are some people that believe that the word human, which is derived from the Latin root humanus, is related as a cousin to this word humus. And in that context, human would essentially mean earthling. That which comes from the soil. And this we know is true scientifically, that we share all the same components of the dust of the earth. And it also shows up in our spiritual traditions dating way, way back, right? We have, you probably remember Genesis 3:19, from dust you are and to dust you shall return. But dust does not have to mean insignificant. It can also remind us that we are of the earth. And the dust of the earth comes from the stars, right? So you've probably heard that saying that we are stardust, but it's true. May our humility remind us that we are children of the earth, that we are children of the universe. And so perhaps when we are brought low, we are also brought into harmony. We are brought into connectedness. I like to think of it as a cosmic humility, to recognize that all of this is so much bigger than me. It's so much bigger than my understanding, right? And to let go of trying to have it all figured out. Now you might be saying, okay, Jake, you have reduced my ego to the size of an atom today. How am I then supposed to walk out here and try to order lunch at Beyond Bread? Right? Like, it's unfair. I'll bring it back, okay? I'll bring it back, okay? Yes. You and I are incredibly small, right? When looking at the size of the universe or the length of time of the universe's lifespan. But even smaller than you or I, compared to the universe, even smaller than that, is the likelihood that you would be here at all, right? The number, to calculate the miraculousness of your existence, the number is so infinitely small, it far outweighs how small we are in the scope of the universe. The universe wanted you to be here, right? You are the universe with consciousness, with life, with love. There is an Indian guru, Nisargadatta Maharaj, who said, wisdom tells me I am nothing, Love tells me I am everything. Between the two, my life flows. Humility invites us into the ultimate paradox that while you and I are small creatures on a fleeting speck of dust, we are also the eyes and ears of the divine. We have consciousness. We have love. Right? We contain multitudes. There is an infinity inside your own heart and mind. Don't forget that. Find yourself somewhere in between the two. There is a rabbinical teaching, right? It's a teaching shared within the Hebrew rabbinical tradition, and it goes like this, okay? It says this. It says, we must all have two pockets. And you're thinking, that's easy, right? I can start with that, right? Like, oh, humility. Okay, I went too far. All right, I'm learning. All right. This rabbinical teaching, it says we must all have two pockets, okay? Again, those of you out there who are wearing jeans, you're like, done. We're already good. We're set. Not so easy, though. Sometimes ladies' pants does not have pockets. I feel like it's unfair, right? We should start a petition. But recently I ordered some pants online, showed up, no pockets, and Olivia said to me, I think you got ladies' pants. So anyway. However, okay, this teaching, I'll come back. It goes like this. It says you must have two pockets so that you can hold in each pocket two or one note per pocket. And on the left pocket, you hold in your pocket a piece of paper, a note that says, I am but dust and ashes. And in the right pocket, there lies a note that says, for my sake, the world was created. I am but dust, and the world was made for me. And finding ourselves between the two can be incredibly practical, right? Allowing us to get out of our own heads, to remember what's important and what isn't, to prioritize the value of love, and to recognize the ridiculousness of hate. Next week, we're going to close this long journey we've been on with Ethos, this series. We're going to close with a message on humanity. And I find that we don't really have much hope of restoring our common humanity if we are not willing to explore this idea of humility, to explore our place in things, our place in the grand design. And so as you walk out today, if you want to, at any point, stop by the welcome table. There are going to be those two notes for you. One for each pocket. On the left, I am but dust and ashes. On the right, the world was made for me. May you take one and may it be a reminder of our place, right? Connecting ourselves back to this earth that so lovingly supports us. So Aldea, may our humility keep us close to the ground, close to the soil, close to the earth. May we be courageous enough to pray for one good humiliation a day. And may we have the wisdom to see ourselves clearly in response. Right? May we remember that we are small in the cosmos, yet we contain multitudes, that our existence itself is a miracle. May you remember, friends, that you are but dust and ashes, but the world was made for you.